It began with a smell no one in the building wanted to acknowledge. Neighbors on Clara Street had grown used to small oddities, strangers coming and going at strange hours, the occasional thud behind thin apartment walls, the unsettling quiet that sometimes followed. But in the late summer of 2018, something different settled over the small 3-story home where 65-year-old resident Brian Egg lived. It was a mixture of chemicals, decay, and something metallic buried underneath. Something that made people stop mid-step and look at one another with the same unspoken question. Is Brian okay? Brian Egg wasn't a man who disappeared. Everyone knew him as the gentle, quirky neighbor who loved conversation and never ignored a friendly knock. But for days, then weeks, his door stayed closed. No shuffling from inside, no clinking dishes, no greeting from the man who usually couldn't resist waving from his window. Then came the strangers. Unfamiliar men were spotted walking into Brian's home as though they owned it. They carried boxes in and out, moved furniture around, and seemed oddly comfortable navigating the property. When neighbors asked where Brian was, the men brushed them off with vague explanations. He was away, busy, visiting someone. Their confidence made people doubt their own instincts. Still, that smell grew thicker. By late July, the unease evolved into fear. Someone finally called the police and asked for a wellness check. Officers knocked, peeked through windows, and left without forcing entry. The strangers remained, and the smell continued. Another call was made. Again, police arrived. Again, they left. People on that street still remember those days with a quiet frustration. Everyone felt something was wrong, but nobody had enough proof to make authorities act. Then, something broke the stalemate. In early August, a neighbor saw the strangers dragging a large, industrial-sized black bin through the home. It looked like a hydroponic tank, heavy, large enough for something no one wanted to imagine. This time, the neighbor didn't wait. They called 911 again, but now with urgency. Police returned, and what they discovered inside the apartment would haunt San Francisco detectives for years. The home was in disarray, furniture overturned, tools scattered, cleaning chemicals lined the floor, and right in the middle of the living room sat a massive sealed fish tank filled with an unsettling mixture of chemicals, bleach, water, and something else officers couldn't immediately place. Inside that tank were partial human remains. The body had been dismembered, submerged, and left to dissolve. DNA later confirmed the horrifying truth. The remains were those of Brian Egg. Investigators quickly tracked down the strangers neighbors had seen entering the home. They identified them as 2 men, one a bartender, the other a drifter, both of whom had used Brian's credit cards, moved money from his accounts, and even hired a cleaning service using his name. Their confidence suddenly made sense. They weren't visiting Brian. They were living off him, long after he was gone. Despite the evidence, prosecutors hesitated. Without a confirmed cause of death, only partial remains. It became difficult to prove murder beyond a reasonable doubt. The tank's chemicals had erased potential forensic clues. No fingerprints, no weapon, no timeline that could stand unchallenged in court. Charges were eventually dropped. To this day, no one has been convicted for the death of Brian Egg. But the unanswered questions remain like ghosts in the hallways of that small San Francisco building. Why did the men target Brian? When exactly did he die? How long were they inside his home before anyone realized something was wrong? And perhaps the heaviest question of all, could Brian have been saved if those early calls had been taken more seriously? And when you step back from the noise of this case, the suspects, the chemicals, the vanished neighbor, what's left behind is a lesson that's brutally clear. yet so easy to ignore in real life. Brian's story teaches us that danger doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, a strange smell, unfamiliar faces, a door that stays closed too long. Small things we brush aside because we're afraid of being dramatic or wrong or intrusive. But here's the truth we don't like to admit. People rarely regret speaking up. They regret staying silent. The neighbors on Clara Street lived with a quiet guilt long after the headlines faded, not because they didn't notice the signs, but because they convinced themselves the signs didn't matter. They waited for certainty. They waited for someone else to make the first move. They waited, and Brian died alone behind his own front door. This case is a reminder that in our communities, our streets, our buildings, our neighborhoods, we are often the first and only line of defense for the vulnerable. Police can't be everywhere. Systems don't always respond fast enough. But the people who live close, who hear the everyday rhythms of a home, who recognize what feels off, those people matter. Their instincts matter. And maybe the hardest, most uncomfortable truth of all, evil thrives when good people second-guess themselves. So the takeaway isn't just to trust your gut, it's to act on it. Make the call, knock on the door, ask the hard question. Because one uncomfortable moment may be the only thing standing between someone's life and their obituary. Brian Egg deserved neighbors who leaned into their fear instead of backing away from it. He deserved a world where concern outweighed hesitation, where community wasn't just a word, but a responsibility. If his story teaches us anything, it's this. You don't need proof to care. You just need courage. And sometimes, courage is nothing more than refusing to ignore the whisper that tells you something is terribly, terribly wrong.